Hey everybody, thanks for stopping back in at the Red Barn, where I'm sure some of you who I'm gonna call ye of little faith were probably thinking, he's never gonna finish, it's never gonna get done. But you were wrong, so check it out. Enjoy. Okay, and to be fair, I was one of the people that thought it would never be done. But here it is, the engine harness. Now, sharp-eyed people will say, hey, it's not booted yet. And hey, there's a couple of wires that don't have anything going on with them. So let me tell you what's going on here. I have yet to test it. I'm pretty sure everything's going to test out just fine, but I didn't want to boot this until it was all the way toned out for everything. Let me take you through what I like and what I don't like. What I like is that it's a sheathed and labeled engine harness that should fire the car. This will get the car running. And for the most part, I like it, but it was a good learning experience for planning ahead. As it turns out, there are some things that I don't like, and one of them is I should have followed the rules from the High Performance Academy training courses, which say mount all your hardware that you know you have to run wires to. And I thought, yeah, I'll just work it out. And it didn't work out the way I had hoped. Now, it's not going to prevent the car from running, but let me just focus in on the stuff I really dislike. This set of wires. So it's because I didn't know where the map sensor was going to go. I didn't know where the solenoid valves were going to go for the variable intake valves. And I didn't know where I was going to run the fuel pressure sensor, because there's a bunch of different places on the fuel lines where it could have gone. And so I made the mistake of running those leads all the way up through here and down into this branch. And then I realized, oops, and all of these items are at the front of the car, or the front of the engine. So this whole set of wires could have just come right out of here and gone boop, right up to where they need to go. So this is messy and not great. What else don't I like? Oh, I think I'm not thrilled with how the coils come through the middle, or the coil wiring comes through the middle of the intake manifold and then wraps out to the coils on the cylinder heads. So I think what I'm going to do is rethink this. Same deal on this side, obviously. What else? I think that's pretty much it. Oh, the other thing, let me show you the engine and some of the stuff that, some of you are just probably laughing going, man, this guy, he needs to get his act together and plan better. But that's just me, and that's what works for me. So let me show you something on the engine. Actually, I'll start by showing you this, and you can see what I've done here. This is the cam position sensor, and you might say, why are you going from a connector to a connector? This is the factory Ferrari connector that I simply sliced out of the engine harness and pinned into a Deutsch connector for the cam position sensor. And I want you to notice too that the cam variators, these are the sensors, or excuse me, the solenoids. These two are the solenoids that do the variable valve timing. And those of you that have watched this from the beginning may recall that this engine, the Ferrari 360 engine, has just an on and off variable valve setting. It's not progressive, it's just on or off. So since I wasn't sure about what I don't know yet, here's what I did. As you saw in the harness, I just cut off the factory harness, and that goes to the cam position sensor, which is right here. So I have the factory other end of this plug that transitions to the Deutsch connector that goes into the harness. And then these are the variators, they call them, the variable valve timing solenoids. And you can see here I did the same thing. I ended up using the factory Ferrari harness and just grafting a Deutsch connector onto it, and then this will plug into my harness. So this is not the tidiest either, because I didn't bother, measuring for length, etc. I want to make sure this whole thing works and the engine runs and all that good stuff. So just like everything else with this build, once I get version 1, I see it and I decide, I can do better. So the engine harness is almost done, and I think those of you that have been following me on the channel for a while know what that means, and that means that we need to start on version 2. So I'm not going to worry about this really until after the car's running, but I do want to go back and redo the whole harness, and I probably should have done this in the first place, but I was a little too excited. But I want to do a fully concentrically twisted harness. And the folks that do this professionally will tell you that doing a concentrically twisted harness is 4 to 5 times as long, takes us 4 to 5 times as long as just a regular harness like I've done so far. But the result, when you see this, A, it's beautiful to see when you're building it, but when you see it sheathed, it's literally completely round, super flexible. It's just a super, super tidy way of doing a harness, and it appeals to my OCD in the biggest way possible. So I will get into this once I start working on it. It's going to be in the future, but I did want to give you a preview and just say, concentrically twisted harness, baby. This is going to be so cool, but I'm not going to get distracted by it. The reason I'm not working on something else is I'm waiting for parts. So I just wanted to kind of get myself, kind of a little bit of experience about what I'm up to and how this is going to go. So, coming soon. And with the engine harness almost complete, at least complete enough for the motor to run, you'd think, oh, I should be able to fire this thing up pretty quick, right? Well, there's a couple of other things that this motor needs and has to happen before I can try to fire it. One is I still haven't done the belt service, so the drivetrain's got to come out for the belt service to happen, and some other miscellaneous tidying up. But one of the really important things is I have to send a clutch out to be rebuilt, because I can't fire this motor without the transmission attached to it. And that's because, those of you that have followed along will recall, the dry sump tank wraps around the differential, and it's going to be hard to see. Maybe I can show it to you if I take the camera down in here. This big bump right here is the low pressure, the oil feed from the dry sump tank, which is, again, wrapped around the transmission, or wrapped around the differential. That's the oil feed that runs through the front of the transmission case, past a big seal in the block, and into the oil pump in the motor. The trans has to be all ready to go, meaning clutch, new throwout bearing. There's a few other miscellaneous things that go on in there. And that has to happen before I can fire the motor. So drivetrain's got to come out. A couple more things have to happen. I got to button up the fuel system. But after that, we're going to be ready to try to fire this thing. So it's not that far away. Just a couple of major things to happen before we do that. So yeah, getting right down to it. So with the engine harness pretty much wrapped up, I wanted to get a couple of other systems things taken care of. And one of them is the water fill and overflow tank. So I whipped up sort of a version 1 bracket setup, and I'll show you what I'm thinking. Now it's a matter of where that thing's going to go. And as you know from an earlier episode, this is the factory vacuum accumulator, and I've got some of the factory fittings. I'm going to need to use these check valves, but I'm just, don't worry about that for right now. But this is probably going to end up down in here someplace, so that kind of takes care of this corner. Plus I have to have an air cleaner on both sides, and that's going to probably be in this area. So I don't really have the ability to use this spot on either side, because the battery's over on the passenger side. So what I'm thinking is, this tank, by the way, this is the factory 360 tank, and as I mentioned, I just put together this quick little bracket just to sort of see. And after playing with it, it looks like it's going to go right here. And that seems low, but it's highest point in the system, actually. The radiator at the front is low, obviously, and then the heat exchanger, the lines are off and the heat exchanger is out of here, but the vent, steam vent, if you will, is down in that area, and it comes back and plugs right onto here. So this, though it seems low, is actually workable. Obviously, it fits under the Targa roof in storage. It's going to cause me to change the shape of the trunk liner, but I think that's going to be okay. So I, after playing with this and working out kind of how I wanted to do it, I worked up a slightly different bracket design. Let me show you that. And rather than have a separate support arm, I'm going to give a go to making a one-piece bracket where this area will fold up, and that'll be the pickup point off of a tab on the transmission mount crossbar. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this and get it all bent up and see how it fits. And there it is, temporarily mocked in place. So the bracket is down into there, and then I added made up a little tab, bent over the corners, and a hose clamped that in place. And this gives me, you know, is it aligned correctly? Is it the right location? And then I just have to make a spacer for down in here to get it up to this height. I want it as high as possible, but not too high, so it clears everything. And so that it's the high point in the system, and it is. And then, yeah, there's a hose out the bottom, or an outlet out the bottom that'll get routed down to the water pump, which is right there. So yeah, some hoses to run and things like that, and it looks pretty good. I mean, it'd be great if there was nothing here, but remember, there's going to be a trunk liner most of the time, and that's pretty purposeful, and it's factory, so I'm calling that good. Come on, you know me better than this by now, don't you? Yes, after multiple attempts and different designs, I decided to spin the whole thing 90 degrees because it just fits better. Looks a lot better this way. And what that required, or I decided to do, was add this 1x1 crossbar at the base over here. Now that's where the firewall used to be. And granted, this thing's, you know, plenty strong with the transmission hanger cross members back here. But this doesn't get in the way of anything. I was worried that it might interfere with the wiring for the oil pressure sensor, but it doesn't. And it provides some pickup points for some other things that I may decide I need. So this now has a bit different little bracket tacked on to the crossbar here. And, you know, the mount itself, I still have to come up with fasteners here. But, yeah, that's not going anywhere. And it's in place enough to get the motor running, you know, make sure it comes up to temp and all that so we can get water in it. One other thing that will have to be changed, or I'm going to change, is if you remember, there's that outlet tube that is the water the water outlet that runs down to a fitting that's just in front of the water pump inlet. And that was part of the reason I had it oriented this way, was so that tube pointed up that direction. But what I've decided to do is just go ahead and weld a little AN fitting onto the bottom of that little sump, and then I'll just run AN lines, just run a 90. That'll be a little bit tidier and all that good stuff. So I still got to do that. Well, I figure I better start learning how to weld aluminum, or I'm never going to get anything done until Martinsville. So what better place to start than the underside of a water tank that'll never be seen. But there's not a horrible aluminum weld. Important that it doesn't leak and it doesn't look horrible. And yeah, so getting there. So water system is almost done. I still have to work out the return line from the front of that heat exchanger down to the hose that runs up to the front of the car. So that's why the car is back up on the quick jack, so I can get into there and work all that stuff out. And then I think you might know, I reordered the shifter cables. I was able to contact one of the other companies that does manual conversions for these things. And I said, hey, I need some shorter shifter cables for a 360. And the guy was like, what are you doing? Anyway, he was kind enough to order these from the factory in Europe that makes them for the conversion kit. So I have to fit those. And if you remember, it's because these fittings right here are a little bit smaller than the ones that came on the control cables. And then I figured, with the car up in the air, may as well put those new shifter cables in. And let me tell you, nothing like the right parts for the job. And yeah, those control cables were a good first start, but these fittings fit so much better. And you know, the clearances, look how tight this is up in here. I mean, there's not room for a lot of stuff. And these I measured perfectly, and they're nice and relaxed, and they're littler of all things. Physically, the cable size is smaller, and they're a bit more flexible. So this worked out great, and all that good stuff. So, oh, and while I'm under here, the other thing that I did was I realized I needed to make a little S-bend. This is the input line for the water into the water pump. And you can see it just needed to drop a teeny bit, obviously to keep the water pump at the appropriate height. This is pretty protected. Yes, it's a hard line, and if the worst happened and this something got right here, it could crush it, but at that point I probably have bigger problems. And with this here, I may try to come up with like a little protector plate, who knows. But this S-bend's done, and look at me, aluminum welding again. So yeah, and what else is going on under here? Not much that you can see, but that was important. And now I got to work out, as I mentioned, I got to work out where, oh where, I'm going to bring the line to go back up to the front of the car. It's getting really crowded here. I may be able to run a line across the front of the motor in here, but these cables may be problematic. We shall see. So I'm going to play around under here for a bit. But that kind of gets you current with what's been going on. And I think that's going to do it for this episode. So as always, please like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, and everybody take care. We'll talk to you all again real soon. Bye-bye.